My barefooted footsteps echoed on the tiled floor in the hall, careless about all the white sand I was tracking in. The house always echoed if Mom wasn't there. It was her presence that filled this place and made it home. I tossed my bag to the floor, knowing Mom would probably scold me for that later, but not caring about it. With her easy smile and always laughing eyes, I knew she could never be mad at me for long. Faith in that knowledge only a 9-year-old could possess. Thinking Mom wasn't home yet because of the echo, I ran into the kitchen. If I was lucky, the cookie jar would be on the lower shelf, and I'd be able to reach it if I climbed on the counter. I skidded to a halt just inside the kitchen and stared at the scene before me. My 9-year-old mind couldn't quite understand what it was seeing. Hot, ma'am, seated at the kitchen table, as always dressed in a flowery summer dress that made her look like a fairy, stepped right out of a fairy tale. So graceful and elegant, movements lithe and sure, like those of a dancer. I loved watching my mom move, loved it even more when she danced. My mom would smile then, and it made her look so beautiful. My mom was light, and she shone like no other adult ever did, because my mom had stories. So many stories. But today, there was no easy smile, no laughter in her vibrant brown eyes that looked so much like mine. Her light had dulled and her face was pale and drawn. "Mom?" I asked hesitantly, my voice trembling as fear curled in my tiny stomach. Had someone hurt her? The fierce need to protect my flighty mother with her delicate features shook my small body. She hadn't noticed me yet, but at the hesitant call, her head whipped in my direction. Panic and fear pulsating in the air. "No, Brittany, run. Not my daughter. Please?" Sheer terror reflected in my mom's melodic voice, a voice made to sing. Confused, I turned around. I wasn't going to leave my mom alone. If she was scared, I needed to help her. A hand closed around my throat, tight and constricting, and above that red eyes gleamed in a face made of shadows. "Hello, little angel." I woke screaming and drenched in cold sweat, my mind filled with swirling darkness and painful memories. My heartbeat pounding in my ears, a wild beating against my ribcage. I was shaking and hot tears were streaming down my face, tears I hardly even noticed. My mind still locked in the harsh grip of my memories that I'd buried so deep that I didn't even know I had them. As my breathing slowed down and my rapid pulse calmed, I became aware of the strong arms wrapped around me, the muscled chest pressed against my back, and the silky fingers running through my hair. A distinctly male voice whispering in a language I couldn't understand. But they were gentle, soft words, meant to calm. Alexander, my soulmate, held me as if he'd take on the world to keep me safe. He held me with such gentleness and love that it nearly broke me after the harsh reality of my memories. "Egramo kroi." "Shh, it's all right. You are safe," in his voice reflected his concern. But even though he didn't know the reason for my distress, he didn't ask. Anger coiled beneath the surface at the thought that something had hurt me and he couldn't do anything about it. When my tears subsided, I slowly uncurled from his tight grasp so I could face him. But I didn't let go. I needed the physical reassurance. I needed to know that he was here, to anchor me to this place. I remembered Alexander, a sob I tried to suppress. I remembered things I shouldn't. They should have stayed buried. Because I had remembered the glorious days when my mother had been happy, when we had been happy together. Just the two off us. But most of all, I'd remembered the day things had changed. The day the darkness had come, a day I had wanted to stay forgotten. My mom had broken that day, and I had been so young and helpless. I had not understood what was going on. Why? I understood now that the darkness had come, and that 9 months later, my baby brother had been born. Exactly 9 months later. I burst into tears all over again. That was knowledge I wanted so badly to forget, because I didn't want to see Andy as the child born from darkness. Darkness and light, because my mom had been light, but mostly darkness. But Alexander said nothing. He simply held me close as he stroked my skin, my scalp in soothing patterns. He didn't ask what it was that I wanted to forget, and for that I was grateful. Light filtered into the room by the time I felt calm enough to fall back asleep, and still he held me. As I drifted off, I heard him sing the by now familiar lullaby in his native tongue, his voice husky and very male, but still beautiful. Chi. I awoke from a pleasant, dreamless sleep a few hours later to find myself alone in the big bed. A dress clearly belonging to Sarah was draped over a chair nearby, meant for me to wear today, because all my things were at the empty house where Andy still was. My heart kicked uncomfortably against my ribs at the thought of my little brother. Guilt, because I'd left him alone in the clutches of my father for a night. Abandoned him even though I'd promised not to. But also fear that coated my tongue and made my skin crawl. Fear that the darkness that had killed my mom, created my baby brother, hid inside him, ready to strike out. A nauseating fear was spreading through me, and it wasn't fair. I loved my brother to death. He couldn't be part darkness. Couldn't be. But now that I'd remembered, I wasn't sure if I could see him in the same light, treat him the same way as I had before. I splashed my face with cold water and then got dressed in the clothes Sarah had laid out for me. I was grateful that my friend had thought to do so. I wouldn't have been able to put on the dress from last night again, and I wasn't going to wear something of Alexander's if we were going back to the big house. Downstairs, I found nobody, and that worried me, but someone had laid out food for me in the large, warm kitchen. It was still strange to me that they had such a beautiful kitchen when they didn't have to eat food. After I had eaten the food, I carefully sent a thought towards Alexander. Alexander? Where are you? His reply was immediate and incredibly relieving. In the study, Gvamo Troy. Moments later, I pushed open the heavy mahogany door and stepped into the study. It was a surprisingly brightly lighted room. Large open windows with French doors lined one wall. They were draped with heavy, dark red curtains, but those were open to the fullest. On one wall, there was a large, old-fashioned fireplace with soft and incredibly comfortable-looking leather chairs in front of it. The walls lined with oak bookcases filled with old leather-bound volumes and crisper-looking new books side by side. Some spaces on the shelves devoid of books, but instead holding a beautiful object of art, a precious stone, or some other knick-knack Alexander had collected. A testimony of the memories of a long life. Right in front of the windows, a solid cherry wooden desk stood, stark lines that looked infinitesimally male. On top of it, a high-tech computer and phone and stacks of paper. Alexander was seated behind it, his forehead creased in concentration as he pored over the papers. It took me a moment to realize that he was, in fact, grading papers for school. Obviously, he had to do that as a teacher. The fact that I didn't see him as a teacher any longer had made me overlook that. A blush rose to my cheek as I remembered what we'd shared last night, before the dreams of memory. When my eyes came back to him, I found him staring at me with a knowing smirk on his face. "Morning agramokroy, you look delectable in that dress," he said. Then he crooked a finger. "Come." I wanted to resist, simply because I didn't want to be commanded like that. I wasn't some silly girl. I was his soulmate and his equal. But the memories still haunted me, and I needed to be close to him, because he could give me solace, the kind I'd hungered for ever since my mother died. So I walked over and around the massive desk to stand beside him, and I didn't protest when he drew me into his lap and held me close in the circle of his arms. Nothing was said as I rested my head on the wide expanse of his muscular chest, breathing in the scent of him and the warmth that would keep me anchored to this world. He played with the pendant on its silver chain around my neck as he continued to work. The movement thoughtless. It was cute how my very old and very powerful mate had fallen for such an uncontrolled motion. At long last, he leaned back in his chair, sliding the last paper on top of a stack. "All done," he sighed as he returned his attention on me, sliding a hand into my hair rub, unknown tension away. His other hand still playing with the pendant, my mother's pendant, shaped like an angel's wing. Content to just still and let him go through the soothing motions, even though I no longer needed them. Both my hands clasped loosely in his shirt. He hadn't bothered to fully button it, allowing me to see a perfect triangle of his chest. Skin that softly golden color. "What's the story behind the necklace, Britt?" Alexander asked softly. His eyes held curiosity only as he peered at the intricately wrought pendant, the lines so delicate and so perfect that the silver wing looked real, alive. I smiled. This was a happy memory, as I told him. It was my mother's, and her mother's before her. She always told me that a man came from the heavens one day, a man of gold. Golden hair and golden skin, as if the sun lived inside him, The pendant was his gift to my grandmother, and he told her to pass it on to her firstborn child. My mom always said that if we were in need of help, we could wish on the pendant and the man from the heavens would come to save us. An angel? Alexander nodded thoughtfully. It's funny how you say your mother describes this man as if the sun lived inside of him. That was what I thought when I first laid eyes on you, Brittany. I smiled at the flattery. My mom never saw the man. Grandma met him just before Mom was born, and the sun does not live inside of me. If it did, I wouldn't miss it so badly. I love the sea and the beach and the days filled with sunshine. It's so much colder here. When it's time to move, a grandma Croyi will move to somewhere warm and sunny. It's a promise, Alexander whispered, pressing his lips softly to my cheek. I could feel a driving need coming from him that said he wanted to do anything and everything to make me happy. His voice turned curious again as he shifted the pendant in his hold, inspecting it intently with his beautiful, stormy gray eyes. It's possible, I suppose. Looks too delicate and real to be human-made. A gasp escaped my lips. You're saying this really could be angel-made? Angels are real? A chuckle as he nodded. Yes, real, but not in the way they're usually thought of. Sometimes they fall in love with a human. It happens. I hit his chest. That's not very funny. If that's true, then I'm part angel. Don't be ridiculous. Jumping out of his lap, I smoothed the dress down. I felt uncomfortable in it. Not used to the off-the-shoulder model that suited Sarah so well. Alexander's looked lost in thought, almost as if he had not heard my last words. Then, he shook himself and picked up a folder. These are the adoption papers. Aglam Mokoi, you can sign them now if you'd like. All we'd need then is your father's signature. You really think this is going to work? I asked hesitantly. I pushed the tendril of fear away into a dark corner in my mind. Getting Andy out of there was more important than worrying over the darkness that might have fathered him. Trust me. The words were said with enough conviction that it left no doubt in my mind that he would manage to do this somehow. Of course, I hadn't really factored in all the vampiric powers he had, although putting my dad to sleep wouldn't really help in getting his signature, and he couldn't expose himself as a vampire either. Thinking about it, however, I knew that Jennifer and Stephanie knew about vampires, but I wasn't sure if they'd realized that Alexander was one. Come to think of it, I wasn't sure if Stephanie had even seen Alexander. After all, last night he'd made them sleep before he'd even entered the room. At the door, Alexander handed me his coat, a leather one that smelled distinctly like him. I accepted it because I didn't really want to wear my own coat. It had bloodstains on the collar. He smirked at me when I accepted it without complaint. I like it when you wear my things. Love it when my scent is all over you. With those words, he strode out the door and straight to his flashy red and very fast car. I had to unscramble my mind first before I followed him out. His scent all over me, his tone had implied a lot more than just the scent rubbing off on me from his clothes. The car ride was far too short, and by the time we reached the house, my fists were clenched tightly on my knees. My stomach, a cold knot. I hoped no one was home except my father and I could just take my things and Andy's things and leave. I didn't want to face my father either, but we needed his signature to get Hay out of there. Still, I could hope I didn't have to deal with Stephanie and Jennifer on top of it all. Alexander reached over and took my hand tightly in his. This is what we're going to do. We enter, pack your stuff up, and get it to the car. They can't protest about that. After that, we corner your father and get his signature. Then, we pack up Andy's stuff and leave. I assume it won't take long. Sarah said your room was very empty. I breathed in deeply and nodded. I don't want Hay to think I'm going to leave him behind. If he sees me take my stuff first. I didn't finish what I was going to say, but Alexander nodded. We'll talk to your father first then, but you're not leaving my side, got it? I'm not letting you alone in there with anyone but your brother. I don't trust them. His voice took on a sharp edge, and his stormy eyes became dark. So very dark. I touched his face, rubbing my fingers over his jaw. I know, I won't leave your side. You're the badass vamp. They can't hurt me when you're there. You'll protect me. A smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Damn right I am. I'll always protect you, Britt. Always. Shortly after that, I found myself unlocking the front door and stepping into the big house. My footsteps echoed, but I couldn't hear Alexander move as he stepped inside right on my heels. He was like a shadow, so silent. "Where's your father, you think?" he asked me in a low voice. The Irish accent replaced by the crisp British again, now that someone else might possibly hear us. I nodded down the hall. "In his study if he's home. He's always working." Alexander didn't miss the rueful tone in my voice. As he stalked past me, a predator let loose, he ran his knuckles softly across my cheek to reassure me. I followed him down the hall and pointed him to the right door. He stood still for a moment in front of it and then nodded. "He's here." He must have caught my father's scent, or maybe even heard his heartbeat behind that door. That was the only way he could have known. Alexander didn't knock as he pushed open the door and strode inside. His movements, pure lethal grace. He was a hunter stalking prey. Although I imagined that vampires didn't stalk prey this way usually, going for seduction instead. My father looked up from the dark desk he was sitting behind, a phone pressed to his ear that he dropped in shock at seeing Alexander. Shortly after that, his mask of cool reserve had been restored, and he looked all business. He cast me one look from the corner of his eye as I stepped into the office behind Alexander. "Who are you?" The hostile tone in my father's voice wasn't hard to miss. But Alexander's voice was all cool and collected, cold enough to give even me chills as he said, "Let's talk business, you and I." It was something my father understood as he rose from his leather chair, reaching out a hand across his desk to shake Alexander's. "The name is Henry Tallier, but I think you already knew that." "Alexander Clitton," said my mate, but he ignored my father's hand and leaned his fists on the edge of the desk. Leaning in, so my father sat back down, a crack appearing in that mask of cool reserve on the man I had to call father for 3 years now. "What business did you wish to discuss?" my father asked. Had it been someone else, he'd have insisted on having at least an appointment scheduled, and there would have been a scolding for barging in like this. Clearly, he found Alexander too intimidating to do so. Alexander pulled the folder with the adoption papers out of his pocket and dropped it on the desk. "I want you to sign this, and I won't take no for an answer." "We'll see about that, boy," my father said coldly. Seemed like he'd found his spine back. I swallowed nervously. I hoped this aggressive way of dealing with my father worked. But Alexander was very rich and owned a dozen different companies, restaurants, and shops. On top of all the real estate he owned, he had to be one hell of a businessman. At the boys my father had used at the end of his sentence, Alexander simply stared at him coldly, waiting for him to open the file and read what it was about. It took only a short moment, and then I had the satisfaction of seeing my father gasp, his eyes widening in shock. "These are adoption papers. You want me to give you my son?" He sounded completely blown away by it. "Not me, Brittany," Alexander said, his words clipped and short. I could feel the cold rage he held within himself. My father had no clue how close Alexander was to snapping his neck, but I did, and I didn't want Alexander to go down that path. I stepped closer to him and softly placed my hand on his back, just a touch. But I felt the muscles beneath my hand relax just the slightest bit. "Thank you," showing me how grateful he was that I had acted to calm him down. I knew Alexander was furious about how my father treated me and my brother. My father stared down at the papers and then looked up at me and met my eyes. "You want to raise your brother yourself? How are you going to do that? You left home, you have no money. I doubt you're in a position to take care of him." Alexander hissed, and my father's eyes flicked to him for a short moment before he decided to ignore it as impossible. It seemed he remembered nothing of the episode with the Millers last night. "I can give him the love he needs," I said. But I knew that wouldn't convince my father. He didn't know what love was. If he did, he would have stuck around when my mother got pregnant of me. She might not have all those things, but I do, and Brittany is under my care. Alexander pulled my father's eyes away from me with a snap. "So this is where you ran off to last night? You're sleeping with this man, and you think that's a safe and steady environment you can expose your brother to?" My father's mouth twisted in an ugly way. Before I could stop Alexander, he grabbed my father by the front of his crisp white shirt and dragged him up from his chair. "Don't you talk to Brittany like that? Now sign those papers. You know as well as I that you'd rather be rid of the boy. This way you never have to worry about them ever again." My father's eyes were so big that they seemed to be about to pop right out of his skull. But to his credit, he swallowed and said, "Do you really think so lowly of me?" Alexander's eyes shifted to me, and then he said, "Brittany, why don't you get started on the packing? I'll finish this here. I'm sure Andy would love to hear the good news." My father had not yet caved, but Alexander seemed very confident. It also seemed like he didn't want me to witness what he was going to do next. My spine stiffened, and I was about to protest when he touched my mind with his. Trust me. It was a repeat of the words he'd said to me earlier, and for once I decided to obey without protest. "Don't lose your soul, Alexander," I warned him as I stepped out of the room and closed the door behind me. Worried, but still trusting Alexander to do what was right, I made my way up the stairs to my brother's room. He was probably there with a nanny, worried about why I hadn't returned home last night. I could only imagine what kind of lies Jennifer and Stephanie had made up about my absence. I found him seated on the floor in the middle of the room. His large golden eyes found mine, and he stared at me. His lip immediately started to tremble as he fought back tears. "Brittany, you came back." I nearly broke down myself at the hopelessness in his voice. All my worries about darkness hiding inside him gone as I strode over and tugged him tightly into my embrace. The nanny behind him on the window seat met my eyes and smiled softly, as if she too was happy to see me. "You left." My little brother accused me, and I could only nod. "I did, Giant, but I came back for you and I'm taking you with me. It's our time now," I told him. He stiffened in my arms and then pulled back to look into my face. "Really?" "Yes, really, hey. We need to start packing. What toys do you want to take with you?" I told him, and I felt my own face pull into a smile. Over my brother's shoulder, I could see the nanny jump up and stride to the closet. She was ripping out a bag so quickly and started stuffing it with clothes that I had to wonder about what she'd seen and heard here. Realization dawned on Hay's face, and then the biggest smile ever appeared on his face. Without words, he came back to hug me tightly.